to Jim Gottstein of the Law Project for Psychiatric.
Last year, I talked about how psychiatry is a fraudulent enterprise. This year, I want to talk about how psychiatry is a criminal enterprise. Psychiatry has literally killed millions of people with no real benefit. What is it when someone kills? It is. It's murder. There's a recent book by Peter Gottstein called Deadly Medicine, Organized Crime, where he said, and he is one of the founders of the Cochrane collaboration, which goes through and examines the medical literature to find out how fraudulent it is or how good it is, and he concurs that it's murder. But really, we've been saying that for a long time. So, number one, murder. There's not any more heinous crime than murder. The United Nations, the Special Rapporteur on torture, has found that involuntary commitment, which is really psychiatric imprisonment, let's not mince words, and forced drugging can constitute torture, is torture. Well, that happens millions of times a year. That's a crime. And Lauren, who just introduced me in her dissertation, Devoiced, also talks about our newly minted PhD, Lauren Tenney. The psychiatrist must be held accountable. Psychiatry must be held accountable. Who are some of the people that have been murdered? Little children. Rebecca Riley, 2 years old when she was started on neuroleptics. I don't call them antipsychotics. They don't have antipsychotic principles for many. They're neuroleptics. They're brain toxins. They're chemical lobotomies. That's the so-called, that's what they call the therapeutic effect. Rebecca Riley was started on these drugs when she was 2 and dead by 4. What happened to the psychiatrist who prescribed them? She got immunity from prosecution so they could convict her parents of murder. Esmond Green. The only reason we know about Esmond Green is her death by psychiatry was caught on film. She was in the emergency room for, 24 hours without being seen, collapsed, and people, the staff just walked by. One person even kicked her. So I wrote a letter to the coroner saying, you know, these drugs, she died of deep vein thrombosis. These drugs cause deep vein thrombosis. What did the coroner do? They wrote back and said they were satisfied with what they had concluded.
Outrageous.
Gabriel Myers. Gary Null talked about little children committing suicide. He was one. He was given drugs that caused suicide. He'd had a terrible childhood, and he needed support. He needed help. He was given psych drugs instead, told there was something wrong with him rather than helping him deal with what happened to him. He was given a drug that causes little children to commit suicide, and he did at the age of 7. Dan Markingson, he was enrolled in a study, and his mother desperately tried to get them to take him out, a dangerous study of neuroleptic drugs, and he was killed. So these are murders. Psychiatry also, or psychiatric drugs, especially the antidepressants, cause these murders, as Gary Null said. Okay, what do we have across the street with psychiatry?
A travesty. A farce.
A travesty. Tomorrow, Vice President Biden is going to be talking. And they, you know, we have these tragedies. almost certainly caused by psychiatric drugs. And now there's a witch hunt. We're really facing a witch hunt. And Gary Noll talked about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual being completely subjective. It's really no different than the spectral evidence that was used in the Salem witch trials to convict people, women who, really were not liked, and burn them. So I wrote a letter to the Vice President explaining all this, and I got a form letter back. But now they're teaming up with Psychiatry to come after people with psychiatric diagnoses. And the National Institute of Mental Health says that half of the people at some time in their life will have a psychiatric diagnosis or should have one. So half the people are crazy. What's crazy is this country.
Yeah.
So these are really crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity. It's the banality of evil. It's gotten so normal for this kind of torture and murder and illness causing to go on that people just expect it.
Yeah, what about other countries?
So this drugging of children, I just want one thing also about the drugging of children. It turns out that most of the children on Medicaid given these drugs, it's not properly covered under Medicaid, and it's Medicaid fraud, and we've got a legal campaign going to sue the doctors for committing this fraud, and it's on our website, PsychRights.org.
Yeah.
Woo! Woo! So we call on Psychiatry to stop these crimes against humanity. We call on the American people to wake up and hold Psychiatry accountable. Thank you.
Yay!